Such an honor to bring in a cat who is part of the lineage of music in his family, going back to a time when there really were no genres in music, or there were no barriers in music, and people were coming from the Duke Ellington school that it's all music, and then the subjective part is either it's good or bad. And my guest today, his father was from a band called Orpheus, made a few albums, and had just a ton of accompanists with them, and found their way into the milieu of the sort of fusion of rock, blues, and jazz. J.M. Arnold, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you, Jake. I appreciate it.
Can you just talk a little bit about your own musical affinities in terms of did your family allow you to naturally sort of go towards music, or was it?
Oh yeah,
So
yeah, absolutely.
Break it down.
Yeah, one of the things I remember is my father was Bruce Arnold. He was the lead singer, the founder of the group Orpheus, and amazing guitarist. And when I picked up the guitar maybe about 8 or 9, and when I would play something, or without anybody knowing, I sat down and had learned something, and then I would play it, he'd go, "I didn't show him that." So that was always this running gag of, I didn't teach him that. I didn't show him that. So that was, and we would, repeat that over and over as each new song I would learn, even when I was getting into, my 30s, he would always say the same thing. It was funny. So yeah, I grew up out in West Marin. He was from Worcester, Mass. That's where Orpheus started.
Wow.
And right after the fourth Orpheus album in 1971, he had moved out to California. And so he, came out to West Marin, and that, which was, just a rich musical community, much like Worcester. But it was every group from the 60s had moved out there. Every group that was, typically in San Francisco. All the Grateful Dead kids were out there. All of the, I grew up with, my buddy was, his dad was in the Youngbloods. And then, then there was...
well, hold on. You're talking about, like, Lowell Levenger?
Yeah. Lowell Levenger's... Yeah, Lowell
So
Levenger's
you were out in Bolinas? That kind of range?
We were in Point Reyes, so we were
wow,
just...
Wow, this is deep, man. This is deep.
Yeah, we were just up the street. And so that... in our church was Jerry Corbett from Youngbloods. And
yeah.
So we... that was, I grew up, if your dad was in a group, like in a band, a famous band, that was nothing. It was like, so what? So was mine.
I love this, dude. Point Reyes is, because, Terry Haggerty from the Sons of Champlin was out there.
That's right.
I don't know much about Sly's group. I would assume, Jerry was out there. I guess the question I have is, 4 albums. You guys, Orpheus was cooking the groove in Worcester. Why did your dad decide to move out there?
Well, that's interesting because he when he started, he started really early on. He got into music really early on. His older brother, Les, was an audiophile and was collecting records, and so my dad had heard the latest. His older brother had the latest Elvis record. He had the latest Little Richard record. All of that. So he And then he had people in his family who were musicians, and we found out later that we there was a bunch of Arnolds that were going back that were all really good singers and musicians and all of that. So it was all in the blood. And so he decided, I think one year they got presents, and it was like a trumpet or a cornet and a guitar. And it was the kind of thing where it was like the older brother got the guitar, and my dad got the cornet. And I think it somehow switched, and my dad started to play the guitar. The older brother wasn't interested in it, and so there's a funny story that my uncle would tell, and he said, when we were young, growing up, Bruce started to just lock himself away, and all day, while everybody's outside playing, they'd go, "Hey, where's Bruce?" And he would go, "Oh, he's up locked away in his bedroom, with that guitar."
He's woodshedding up there, yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And he was just up there like, Jimi Hendrix, he was going to sleep with the guitar. I mean, he was just completely into it, and he was learning every single thing. And you have to do that. It was like, you literally, it was like, well, I had to, in order to learn Orpheus songs, which are not easy, they're deceptively, Orpheus songs sound like they're, that's, maybe those are typical chords. But if you break it down, he's playing everything crazy. He's not playing conventional chords.
Sure,
in fact,
sure.
Lowell Levenger was one of the things that everybody pointed out early on, was that Orpheus had major seventh chords in it. You guys are always playing those major sevenths. And so that was the thing that sort of made Orpheus unique, was he was playing really unusual chords. He wouldn't just learn a song and play the song the way it was supposed to go. He'd try to figure out cool ways to have the chords ring out, and augmented ninths and all these kinds of things. So I didn't grow up learning like triads. I remember during like one of the Orpheus sessions, Howie, the keyboardist, was having me sort of play some stuff, and he said, "Well, just play these chords, this chord, this chord, this chord." And I said, "Well, is that this?" And he goes, "No, that's like a C augmented ninth with the added, whatever." And I go, "Well, what's a regular C?" So, and my dad's like, he doesn't know those regular chords.
Right, you were already in the advanced class, man.
Yeah, it's just like I didn't know it, because Orpheus songs don't have those chords in it, or if they do,
wow,
they're the ones that stand out. And that was sort of, people would come up to him and say, "What's that great, amazing chord that's in, I've never seen love like this on at the end of the bridge." And he go, "Well, that's just a regular A." But because all the crazy chords are around it, the regular chord would stand out. So that's the stuff he'd do. One of the guys who was from, it was the group Shana Na, one of the founding members of the group Shana Na, Elliot Kahn.
Oh yeah, I've interviewed him a couple times.
Yeah, Elliot. So when Elliot was growing up in, I think it was around Hyannisport to Cape Cod.
Yeah.
He had gone away to Europe for a while. He got a guitar, and then he came back, and he was learning the guitar. And his friends had said, "You gotta come see this folk group, the Villagers. There's a guitarist in there that's unbelievable. You gotta come see him." And that was my dad, who was like, 18. These guys were all like 16.
Right.
And
right.
And so that was the thing, is he was early on. He was really unique guitarist, very sort of like Stephen Stills stuff, finger style early on, because he got into folk pretty early on, and so now you're starting to get into fingerstyle guitar. So he was playing with 3 or 4 finger picks on, and he was really, really getting good and really doing stuff that was advanced. So by the time he's maybe 16 years old, he was already playing in folk groups that were playing around Worcester and Cambridge and
was
all
he
of that.
Was he playing at like the Club 47 down there in Cambridge, like where Joan Baez and those cats were playing?
Yep, Club 47, and then one of the guys who was who would run Club 47 was I can't remember his name. Was the guy who was who had also produced Like a Rolling Stone. He was he was interviewed by Dad or Dad. He interviewed Dad. I think he interviewed Dad and Alan Lorber in '68, just as the Orpheus album was coming out.
Oh my God!
And he said, "Oh yeah, we remember. He was right there at the beginning of the scene when they were starting to pick talent out, and people knew about the Villagers, which was the group that my dad had formed with another guy, Jack McKennis, who later went on to be in Orpheus, and so that was 65, 66.
That was that was like a folk group, so to speak.
Yeah.
Or it wasn't like a jug band or anything like that.
No, he was in jug bands. Occasionally, they would do those kinds of hootenannies and stuff with Jim Question and all of those guys. Those were all his buddies, and he was playing around all of that stuff. And like I said, there was people who were coming by and listening to the Villagers who were really impressed, and because the Villagers are really the antecedent to Orpheus. That's where Dad started to write songs. So he's already starting to write songs, which eventually end up on Orpheus albums. Songs like Just a Little Bit and So Far Away in Love. Those were all Villagers songs. Those were off the second Orpheus album. And that was all stuff he was writing when he was 17.
The instrumentation of the band. Was there a trap set in the Villagers or no?
It was just two guitars. They were both playing Gibson Hummingbirds.
It was just a duo.
Yeah, just a duo.
Wow.
And it was they both they people had said, hey, you got to meet this guy and you got to meet this guy. And my dad had been looking. He was really wanted to get somebody to harmonize with that was really good. And this guy Jack, who was I think a year or two older. Their voices, if you listen to, my dad and him together on a song like Just a Little Bit, or even, especially I have all of these recordings they made as the Villagers. They played, all around and were regulars at coffee houses and stuff. That's where they got their name. Was they were playing at a club called the Villager. But by the time my dad's in junior year of high school, senior year of high school, he's already a professional musician now. He's already playing summers. He's already going up to the Cape and performing and stuff. And he's already, having all these experiences like a professional musician and being paid as a professional musician.
Sure.
So that was it, and it was the kind of thing where he would show up at school. I think you remember he'd be like in high school, and he said, I was like barely there, and then when I'd show up, they'd go, all right, listen, you gotta shave your sideburns. You can't, and he'd leave, and they'd send him home. He'd take like an eighth of an inch off. Come back, and no, you still, and so the agreement was, listen, just leave at lunch. We're going to put all your classes early on. We don't want any of the kids to see you. And it was that kind of thing. And then, he would just ace whatever he needed to ace because he's smart and he was able to do that. And of course, they started to sense that, he's going.
He was a different kind of cat. He was a different cat, man. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That whole vibe is really the same vibe I grew up with out in West Marin because I was growing up with all the kids of these musicians and their sort of free spirit thing where we're all just kind of going our own way and we're all smart and we're all
no, but that's the magic of it. Like that is so because when you're really not focused on the what society says you should be focused on, and yet you can go in and still pull it off and get good grades. And that to me is like, I could never pull that shit off. And I love, and that was true because those guys, all those cats, Yorma, Garcia, all those cats, they were not academic. They were brilliant, but they were street scholars. I mean, they were voracious readers, and they were very, very well educated without going into the idea of the academy, and not
Right.
just the music academy. And then but before, because I can't wait to get into that. But I do want to say, like, ultimately, like, they wound up on Verve, and I was wondering if you could take us through the idea of how they wound up going to New York and ultimately getting into the studio scene and making those records.
Well, so it was a natural progression as he was starting to write more and more songs. They were already recording demos as the Villagers, so they got a drummer and a bass player, and they made a couple of demos.
Wow.
Just as studio musicians. And the idea was to do basically the same thing as a Simon and Garfunkel would have been. It would have been, we're going in and we'll sign a deal as a duo, and we'll just work with studio musicians.
Right.
And so they were making these great demos, which we have, and they were taking them down to New York, driving down to New York and talking to people, and they had some connections and some names from people who were in Boston. And would have been 66, beginning of 67. And so they met with Wes Farrell, and Wes was the hot young guy who was producer who was, everybody's talking about. He was already making a name for himself. He later went on. I think at the time he was maybe doing "Hang On, Sloopy," which he had written that. And there's an interesting story with Bernard Purdy, the drummer who ended up playing with my father, and "Hang On, Sloopy." But he was sort of the real cool guy, young guy who was producing a lot of stuff at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So they went and met with him. They somehow got a meeting with him, and he said, "Hey, listen, man, folks out. This, you guys are great. These songs are great, but nobody's signing folk duos anymore. You just go get a band,
right? Yeah, or even like, but I mean, they were, and go plug in. Had he plugged in yet? Was he playing electric, or was it strictly acoustic at that point?
They had pickups. They had DeArmond pickups on their Hummingbirds. I think at that point my dad might have upgraded to the Epiphone Excelente, which is a super rare. It's like the holy grail of Gibson flat tops.
But no rhythm section though.
No rhythm section.
I love it. Yeah, go get a band. Yeah, go get a band.
Right.
Yeah.
So he said just do this, but just add two guys and come up with a name. It was basically that. It was I love what I'm hearing. But just go get two other guys, and then we'll worry about it. Like if the guys are good or not, it doesn't make any difference. We'll still use studio musicians.
Absolutely.
So that was it. Now that he can't find the time yet. I don't think but he had. I think he had a bunch of other songs. He didn't have "I've Never Seen Love Like This," all those kinds of things. So they went back, and Jack had previously played in a folk group with a guy who was even older than Jack, named Eric Gullickson. Eric Gullickson, who was at this point had kind of given up on music. He had got married. He had a kid, and he was a successful in the electrical field, and he had a good sort of straight job. And he came by. Bruce and Jack came by, and Jack said, "Listen, you got to meet this guy. He's writing these great songs. Listen to these songs." He played the songs for them, and he said, "I'm in." Much to the chagrin of his wife, who thought, he's finally settled down and we can have, all this stuff. He's like, no, I'm back in. This is going somewhere. So they got this guy, Eric, and Eric could click in immediately. He knew exactly, and he was as a bass player, and he clicked in immediately, knew exactly what to play and knew exactly what to do. And he said, "All right, let's get a drummer." So they started to audition drummers, and I think they got a drummer that they really liked. And the idea was we're going to go right back and meet with Wes Farrell again. And somehow that drummer, drummers were the kind of thing. It's like if you could get a drummer and they just slipped through your fingers, it was so hard to get a drummer or a good drummer. And they ended up getting a drummer named Harry Sandler, who was working at EU Wurlitzer Music, which was like where everybody bought all their instruments in Boston.
Right. I feel like I know that guy. I feel like I know that name, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Harry Sandler. Harry Sandler went on to take over the Massachusetts Museum, the Dirty Water. It was originally called Dirty Water, but it was the music. The Museum of Music. I forget what the name of the place is. But he's been active. He's went on to to do other stuff in music. But he really wanted to be a star, maybe more so than an accomplished musician. He was kind of the guy who really was very ambitious. So he wanted in on this. And he knew, like everybody, it was really, when I talked to people later, they said it was really all about Bruce. Everybody already knew Bruce was going somewhere because he had this unbelievable, great baritone voice. He had Jack, who could do accompaniments vocally, but his guitar playing was on another level. And that was what people would press on us. So we were doing shows back east. This was the first time my dad really hung out with people. He would just kind of do shows and then split and go home in his BMW 2002 and be home by the time the party had just started after these shows.
No, he sounds like me, dude. Just like an Irish goodbye. Get out of there,
Exactly.
Yeah.
He would just, if the show was in Connecticut, he would drive back.
Yeah, no, that's like Joe Henderson did that shit,
Yeah, that's right. And so, and I remember we were having dinner with, lived up the street from us in Novato. Before Dad passed away, we were neighbors with David Freiberg from Quick Silver Messenger Service.
Oh, that's so classic, yeah.
That whole area, was all in Novato where we lived, was all where we had moved from West Marin to Novato. That whole area where we moved into was even more like West Marin than West Marin was. This whole hill was everybody there. There was, there was the chef for the Grateful Dead right there. There was, this person here was over here. I mean, it was, there's where Steve Miller lived. There's where, all the guys lived. And then there's Quicksilver Messenger Service and Starship. And so,
oh my God.
So I remember my dad's telling how, he would go to these shows and then he would just split and you never partied any of that stuff. David goes, "Oh, we would have hated you." It was like, so, but that was sort of his style. And so when we went back and did all these shows as Orpheus later, is when he reunited the group, it was the first time people were really coming up to him and telling him the impact that he had on them. And we were finding out stuff, which, I'll get to later, but we were finding out stuff like Laura Nero was a huge fan of Orpheus and had all 4 Orpheus albums sealed. She had 2 copies of them, and Miles Davis was listening to Can't Find the Time over and over again, and driving his wife Betty up the wall. She played that song over and over, and we found out Frank Sinatra was a huge fan of Orpheus, and that all because Dad was a baritone, all of the A&R guys in New York would take Orpheus songs as soon as the albums would come out, record them off the album, and then send them around to all the baritone singers like Frank and Andy Williams and Tony Bennett, and so everybody knew about this band, and you sort of had my dad's like, I had no idea. So
no. So I just want to be clear. So Sandler had delusions of grandeur and never made it. So how did Purdy come in as the drummer?
Okay, so Sandler, they got Sandler basically at the last minute,
right?
And he was good. He was a good live drummer, but
right.
Not good enough to be on the record. And it was the kind of the best thing where as soon as they started to record, the producer said, this guy's not going to do it. And in the same, really, he knew exactly the rhythm section that he wanted. So they got Sandler. They went back, and before they went back, Sandler had been friends with a guy named Brian Interland, who later went on to work for Capitol Records, another famous guy. And he said, "Listen, before you guys go back, make a demo. Rehearse." They rehearsed for a month, and they would come into gigs where it would be Bury in the Remains and all these groups and the Rockin' Ramrods that were playing around in all these clubs that were these surf clubs, the surf ballroom clubs that were around Nantasket and Hyannisport. And those were all people that Harry knew because Harry had previously been in the surf band before Orpheus. And so this new group would come in with no name, which was Orpheus, and they would just come in while between the two bands setting up, nobody knew who they were, and just try out this new material. And everybody flipped. And, that was one thing that everybody remembers the same, is that they would come on and no one had heard this before. No one had heard somebody up front playing an acoustic electric with fingerstyle with going through amps where it almost sounds like a keyboard. That's how intricate the harmonies were. So my dad was playing all of the intricate harmony parts while singing, and then Jack playing the rhythm in background. It's got all of this vocal stuff going on. Eric, the bass player, is also singing, and he's playing all these great figures. All these, they're focusing right in on a sound that no one had really, done at that point. Plus, they were really much more rocking than the first album. They were doing the first song they did, which we have I have all these fantastic recordings as they're trying out these songs. One of them was "Don't Be Cruel," the Elvis song. And my dad had just whipped up this arrangement of "Don't Be Cruel," and they started to play it, and it's like that story about when the Led Zeppelin first started to play "Train Kept a Rolling," and and John Paul Jones says the room just exploded. It was just like, oh my God, what is this? That was what was happening. It was like, okay, this works. So they were doing all of these great new songs. People were like, well, who are you guys? And then they're like, well, we don't know yet, And then they were kind of split. And they did that maybe 3 or 4 times, maybe not even that. And then went right to New York and got 9 contract offers. So they made a demo at Emerson, got in a car, drove down to New York, took the tape in, and that was basically when you could just walk into the recording places. And they walked into Verve, they walked into all of these places, and then they went to see Wes and came back and we got this band, and at that point they may have decided, based on they were across from an Orpheum theater, and my dad said, "How about Orpheus?"
In Boston.
Yes, and I think that was that might have been on the way back. They might not have had a name yet, so they came in, and so they saw Wes Farrell again, and then at this point they had met with maybe a couple of other people like that day, and they all listened to the tape and handed them contracts, like, we're ready. So they got to Wes, and Wes they play their whole set, and they play "Can't Find the Time," which my dad had just written, but now they had this band arrangement of it. And they stop, and Wes goes, "Who wrote that song?" And my dad said, "I did." And he goes, "Go home, write another song like that, come back, and I will sign you immediately. Like, I want to produce you."
Jeez.
So he said, "Okay," which this was a huge mistake in hindsight, but they said,
"Yeah,
okay."
What are you going to do with that? Whatever.
Right. So they got more contract offers that day. They came back with 9. Right. So now they're coming back like, we are going to be stars, and we haven't even played a paying gig. And they stop. They get their name. Dad comes up with the name. They go back, and they're okay. So they've got all these contracts. They got to get a lawyer to look at them. They're starting to to consider everything. Dad writes the song that is sort of the sound alike to Can't Find the Time, and it's called I've Never Seen Love Like This. And it's so funny because, Can't Find the Time is ba da 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 da, can't find the time to tell you. And I've Never Seen Love Like This is, baby, remember when we turn on to it's
Right.
I've never seen love like this. It's basically beat for beat, except faster with a different tempo, and then the chords are different. But he basically followed Wes Farrell's guideline. But Wes never got to hear it because while they're, getting together to now go back, one of the owners or the managers of the club Unicorn was a guy named Ray Perrette. And Ray Perrette went on to manage tons of artists. Very famous guy, just passed away, I think 2 years ago, maybe last year.
Wow.
And I found out he was living right down the street from me. I knew him. I knew what he looked like, from photos. And I was riding down the street on my bike, and I saw him, and I said, "Ray Perrette, oh my God, the true architect of the Boston sound," because it was Ray Perrette who was managing a group called Underground Cinema, which became Ultimate Spinach.
Wow.
And so Ray had already got Alan Lorber to come up and check out this new scene that was happening in Boston at the time. Hey, man, there's a lot of Boston bands happening up here, and nobody knows about them. There's a great scene up here. There's a bunch of colleges, and he got Alan Lorber to come up. Alan Lorber heard Underground Cinema, Ultimate Spinach, and he wanted a sound similar to the San Francisco sound. He wanted his Jefferson Airplane. He wanted something that was psychedelic, and he thought that was where music was going. And according to him, the San Francisco sound was already dying. That had already come and gone. He's thinking the way producers were thinking, very old school, like, that sound's already old, that's the, without any idea that these bands could, go on.
Right. It was right.
And and also that they were organic, that was
right,
organic.
exactly. Most of them were like skiffle players,
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And they're all, they all knew each other in that area. This was Boston at the time was very fragmented. You had guys who were into the Stones, and then all the folk clubs were becoming rock clubs, and they were strictly about that. And then there was guys who were, had been into folk and had been into, but they didn't ever come together. And so, this group had already been signed at the time, and Ray said to, it might have been somebody had contacted Ray, and Ray had heard about Orpheus. And he heard the tape, I think, and he said, "You guys have got to talk to Alan Lorber. He will love you," because Alan Lorber was already at that time a successful arranger of music from the 50s and 60s. That was Neil Sedaka and Leslie Miller and Leslie Gore and all these kinds of things. He was already a guy who was doing a lot of orchestration. And he knew that he really wasn't going to be doing much of that with Ultimate Spinach.
I just want to say, when I interviewed Jeff Bax,
Yeah.
he said I got the opportunity to join Ultimate Spinach, but I was already out playing bass with Tim Buckley. He was playing bass with Buckley. Anyway, I knew that name from somewhere too. Did your dad know? Did your dad know?
Skunk?
No, Banana then in Boston.
Yeah, he knew the Youngbloods when the Youngbloods were playing. Around Boston, because they were, and so that was. It
was like Jeffrey Kane and those guys, and Bauer.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So he knew. I remember when I was friends with Seth, and Seth had passed away real young.
Oh my God! Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, as I was growing up, I was growing up in West Marin, and that was one of the things where it's like I would tell girls, my dad's in the Beatles. They didn't even know, what that was. But I just tried to pick the biggest name of a group that was from the past. And Seth was the one who goes, "Your dad's not from the Beatles. You always killed that," And I go, "Shut up." So that was, but that I remember when Lowell came over to pick up Seth. That was the first time my dad had saw Banana in years, and I remember my dad opening up the door and going, "Banana!"
Wow.
Oh my God, that was just that.
So it wasn't. Anyway, I don't want to get too far off, but so I just want to be clear. Lorber, continue on. Ultimately, I just want to get to the nexus of Pretty Purdy getting into Orpheus. Yeah.
So Lorber, right? So Lorber. So they go to the Unicorn. Above the Unicorn is the offices for Amphion, which was Ray Peret's management company. And Ray really wanted to sign Orpheus. He wanted to manage Orpheus. And for some reason that didn't happen, which probably was a big mistake, in hindsight, because for whatever reason they didn't sign, and they signed with somebody else who was like one of Lorber's buddies. So they got no money. But basically, when they were there, they auditioned and for Lorber live above the Unicorn. And the second they were done, he brought contracts over immediately and said, "I'm working on a promotion. It's going to be $250,000, a promotional thing with MGM Records. I want to sign you right now." And he, was not going to take no for an answer. I think they maybe slept on it one day, and then they decided to, instead of going back and meeting with Wes again, let's just go with Alan. Alan's got the history. We know from my dad, it's like, he said, what do you want for these songs? And my dad said, "Well, listen, I like all sorts of stuff, but I like Henry Mancini.
Right.
I like that kind of stuff. I like Ravel and Debussy." And that just made Lorber go, "Oh my God, I found, my golden child. This is what I've been looking for my whole life." So that was it. And he plays guitar and he sings.
Right. I mean, it's totally unique sound,
Right. Yeah. That's it. So he hit right there. He knew this is it, and that was there's where you get the idea of Alan really recognizing that all these guys are good, but Bruce is the guy. That's the guy that I'm signing, and so they sign with him. Wes Farrow never gets to hear "I've Never Seen Love Like This," which became the follow-up single to "Can't Find the Time," and was pissed when he found out that he had lost Orpheus, and was so pissed and that he said, "Who is this Lord guy? What is this $250,000?
Right.
And I want in on that." So he went to MGM Records and said, "I've got a band. I want a cut of that." And he quickly put together Beacon Street Union. And that was the third group of the first wave of the Boston Sound groups. It was Ultimate Spinach, Orpheus, and Beacon Street Union. So Wes gets in on it as a FU to Alan. He convinces the brass at MGM that he should have a cut of that, and I've got a band too. So Beacon Street Union is basically a revenge band for not getting Orpheus.
Wow.
And so that was basically what it all happened. It quickly became, let's get this Ultimate Spinach record done. That record because they changed the name from Underground Cinema to Ultimate Spinach, which I don't think Ian Bruce Douglas liked, and that became there's your first album, and that got a lot of buzz, the name and everything, and that was the album that everybody went to go see. Oh my God, it's Pod, and all that kind of stuff. So that was the first album that hit, and that people had no idea what Orpheus was, and especially in Massachusetts, they didn't even know how to say Orpheus. They used to say Orpheus.
Pass the card.
Yeah, it was Orpheus, all this stuff. It was all they were saying anything but how it really was.
Orpheus.
Yeah. So they go in almost immediately, it's scheduled that, okay, I'm going to knock out this Ultimate Spinach record. He might have been doing it at the same time as Orpheus. He flies them all down. They stay at the Park Sheraton, and they're there. The next morning, a telegram comes. Western Union telegram comes, and it's to Bruce Arnold, confidential. So my dad opens up the telegram, and it says, "Come down to Bell Sound Studios. Just you. Do not tell the other guys."
Oh.
And so my dad goes down there, and he says, "All right, I'm sitting at this is Alan," and he says, "I'm sitting at the piano." He's sitting at the piano. He says, "I want to go through all the songs." So Dad sits there and plays all the songs, and Alan's identifying the chords exactly, writing down the chords, and getting every song, because the whole idea from the very beginning is we're going to orchestrate this. So he's getting everything down, learning every single song, writing every single song, play me that one. And that's really where they kind of determined that Orpheus is going to become sort of this pioneering soft rock, or they weren't thinking like that, but that's really what it became. Became sort of the first contemporary music, contemporary adult music.
You consider, like, I'm not good. I mean, I came in with the opening that I hated labels, but you think they were pioneers of soft rock?
Yeah, that's what that was what everybody was saying.
Yeah.
In the 70s, when the singer-songwriter thing started to come in and that music genre came in, Terry Kath from Chicago said, "We were just copying you."
That's so sick, dude. That is so insane. I mean, and then they ultimately went off and with Danny Seraphin, and they turned into a more. Anyway, that is so hip to be.
But Terry Kath in the beginning, they saw Orpheus, played with Orpheus, I think in Cambridge, and we had talked to members of Chicago later, and they said we were going to re-release "Can't Find the Time." We were going to do our own version of it.
Oh my God!
And then he said we heard Air Supply wanted to do it, so we wanted to quickly do it before they did it. So all of these bands were already. Everybody was talking about this group that was criminally underrated. That no one, even when the albums were coming out, everybody was like, "Why isn't this a hit? What's going on?"
Because I got to be honest though. I mean, it's very. I mean, this is. But I'm a Taoist, and it's like the Tao is just nature. It's just life. And your dad had a lot of Taoist. He wasn't in it. The dude was literally in it only for the music. It was therefore, like my show, it's you appreciate the people that come along and recognize it for what it is, which is just totally unique, totally cutting edge, and yet there's no drive towards the Western definition of success, so to speak.
You're right. Right. My dad never wanted to be famous.
No, I mean fame is just so overrated, man.
Right.
Yeah.
And he just wanted to make the best music and
be singular, right? I mean,
that's right.
Yeah.
And everybody's talked about him. There was the scene started to begin after the Summer of Love. Worcester had its own Haight-Ashbury, which was called Congress Alley. And Congress Alley, they found a lot of talented people there. This artist community, and they were buying up these old Victorian homes, just like Haight-Ashbury.
Right, just like $150 a month. You were living in these places.
Exactly, and everybody, and then and my dad was right there. He was just a little bit down the hill from there. He didn't want to quite be too much into that scene because he was already getting famous. It was already. Did you hear they already signed a record label? And Bruce Arnold's is looking for songs, and so that was as that was happening.
Well, hold on. I want to go back to this. Lorber and him are at the piano. I want to go back to this. He goes without the band. Lorber decided, okay, this is the sound we're looking for. So then take it from there.
He's kind of throwing out certain songs that are great, but were like the cover of "Don't Be Cruel,"
Right.
There's a bunch of songs that I have all these fantastic demos of where people were like, "Oh my God, I didn't know Orpheus sounded like that." And you did if you saw them live.
Sure.
During that early period, you would see they had some rockers, and they really had a tight sound. So he knew that, and then it was now we're going to go in and bring Jack in. The other two guys just sat in the Park Sheraton. Eric, who was fantastic bass player, Lorber knew for me to bring in just the drummer and work with a bassist who's new, I have to worry about the bassist clicking. I need somebody that just is going to knock these songs out quick. And because he's of the mentality of the previous generation where it's like, let's get this stuff done quick and we want it done in a day. And so he knew my dad could easily get together with a rhythm section and knock these things out.
Knock it out.
And not have to sit and worry about the sound of the
bass.
Thank
God, I hate
that
shit. Yeah.
Right. So those two guys, the drummer and the bass player, just sat in the hotel while my dad and for maybe one day Jack comes in, and they sit in the session, and here comes Bernard Purdy, and here comes Joe Mack. And Joe Macho, he was known by both. He was Czechoslovakian. He had come in the 40s.
Oh my, dude, you're blowing me. I've never heard of this cat.
Yes, come from the 40s and was playing in big bands, and quickly became a hot session player.
Holy
and he was
cow, Joe Mack.
Right, much older than Purdy. He was already an older guy.
Sure.
He comes in, and he's already been doing multiple sessions with Purdy, all secret stuff that everybody, that was the thing is these guys would come in and everybody would quietly say, that's them on that record.
Yeah,
well,
right.
That was that band.
They didn't list accompanists on the records.
That's right. And these guys, and this is when Purdy would come in a suit, and Joe would come in a suit. They all looked
freaking loved it.
And these guys were, these guys knew everything. Purdy was the first time my dad said I understood the importance of a drummer. He said, "Who have I been playing with?" And Purdy just, smiled and said, "Not me." And so that was my dad.
Yeah,
was just
that dude is. Oh my God. But that's just like. So wait, you're telling me Lorber brought in Mack and Purdy?
That's right.
Okay.
So Lorber, that was Lorber's. He knew exactly.
It was the go-to rhythm section. Yeah.
That's right, and they were also on some Ultimate Spinach stuff. So even that far out wacky stuff.
Jeez.
They were brought in to to fix things. That was Purdy was the fixer. That was what he was known for. It was you would come in and he would do that. And I'll tell the sort of quick story about Purdy while we're on the subject.
Yeah.
When Wes Farrell was recording "Hang On Sloopy" with the McCoys, he wanted a sound, but he wanted it. He knew what he wanted, but he didn't want to risk using the band's drummer, to try and get it. So he brought Purdy in, and he said, "All right, Purdy, I want you to sound like a 15-year-old white kid in a garage."
Oh, jeez.
And he goes, all right. So no fills. And he goes, yeah, no fills. Just a straight ahead beat. And nothing identifying it as Purdy. He goes, okay, whatever.
So yeah, the Purdy.
So he starts to boom, tap, boom, boom, and he starts doing it and goes through the song, and Wes stops him. Too good. I want it sloppy. And he goes, okay, all right, sloppy, all right, so a little bit of a lag, all right, I got it, all right, let's do it again. Does it again, stops him again. Purdy, it's too good. I want it even sloppier. And does this for maybe 5 or 6 takes until Purdy gets frustrated and goes, what do you want me to do? Drum with one hand? You want me to drum with one arm? Yes.
That's so great. Man.
So Hang On Sloopy is Purdy playing with one hand as sloppy, trying to mess it up. He's pissed at Wes. So he's just boom, Jack, boom, boom, Jack, boom, hang on, Sloopy. And he's just, that's it. So, and then as soon as he gets done and he goes, I've ruined it. I know it. I know that was horrible. Wes goes, perfect. I love it.
Dude, that's
Right.
I got to be honest. I mean, Wes, I would struggle as a producer just because I wouldn't want to get people pissed off. But the idea of him getting under Purdy's skin to the point where he got him to play exactly what he wanted, that is just.
That's right.
And there was no email or distractions. It was just human to human. That is, you can't.
And that wasn't unusual when we did an interview a couple of years ago, and Purdy, they said, well, the interviewer said, well, how Purdy, what would you, when you were brought in to replace a drummer, were the drummers there? And he goes, yeah, sometimes they were, and I knew they were upset. And I'd ask them, how would you play this? Because I wanted to sound like them. I didn't want to. The producer knew that he wanted it, he wanted
a taste. He wanted it radio friendly,
Right. Yeah. And he wanted a metronome. I mean, he wanted a machine that was just not.
That was human. Right.
But he needed something that sounded. And so a lot of the stuff that Purdy played is not crazy stuff identifiable as Purdy. There are no fantastic Purdy fills that you would hear like on Blue Child or the Aretha Franklin records or James Brown records. But you know who knew if it was Purdy or not? Even when he didn't want they didn't want him to sound like Purdy. Yeah. Right. The guys who were the drummers. And when I met Jason Bonham, John Bonham's son, and we were discussing this documentary on Purdy that we're working on, and I said to him, when do you think that your father first heard of Purdy? And he said, my father knew of Purdy in the 60s, early 60s, when he was just a session musician, and he could identify Purdy even like when it didn't sound anything like whether it was Purdy or not. You knew the little slight hummingbird,
Oh my God! Yeah, that Mason Dixon feel,
Right.
Yeah.
And he knew Purdy, and he knew those songs, and he knew that was Purdy. And then we found out it was even, of course, So they all of those guys, they could hear a track and go, oh, I know that. That's Purdy for sure.
Right,
and
right.
I have that ability too, where I can hear stuff, and you go, is that Purdy? And then you go, nope. The second you hear something that's not, Purdy would never have done that, or Purdy, there's Purdy's fill there. That's definitely.
But you're
Purdy.
telling me that the original "Hang On, Sloopy" is Purdy with one arm?
Yes.
Oh, that's classic.
Purdy, and I told Questlove that from the Roots, and I said,
Yeah.
And he said, let me tell you my Purdy story. And I go, okay. And he goes, my dad was in this group, and he was recording, and Purdy was in on the session. And so he brings me in. He says, I'm 3 years old, or 3 or 4 years old, and I already knew I wanted to be a drummer. And so his dad brings him in, and his dad says, Purdy, this is my son Amir. He wants to be a drummer. And you have any advice for him? And Purdy looks at him and says, it's all about the 1 and the 2, kid. and he remembers that, and it just locked into his head. Well, here's something that's amazing. I found out that session that he was in was for a group called Congress Alley. Now, the group called Congress Alley, which consisted of Questlove's father, is named after an Orpheus song, which was about Congress Alley, the hippie community in Worcester.
This is psychedelic.
So in the early 70s, just like I said, these Orpheus albums, everybody had them. Everybody knew them. Everybody wanted to harvest stuff off of them because they were gold mine. And everybody knew, no one's going to know where this song came from. We could just use this stuff. So this group of Questlove and his mother and his and 2 other people got together a vocal group. They wanted to become sort of a kind of hip and stuff, and they started working out songs, and they found the song Congress Alley off of an Orpheus album from a couple years before, and said, this is great, and we like that name, and they called themselves Congress Alley, and that's became, and that record is like, you can find that record, it's like, $200 or something.
Right.
So, but anyway.
So I want to be clear, Mac, going back, because, Mac and Purdy come in, and they lay it down in 3 hours. Everything's a first take, and they knock out the album. That's it. So they got it all down, and as years went by, this is sort of interesting. As years went by, it was never discussed by my dad, who didn't really care. Purdy later became a member of the group, but it was never discussed that it was Purdy on that first album. As opposed to the original band members, as opposed to the original band members, or Joe as the bass player, or any of that kind of stuff. And it wasn't until sort of later that my dad was in the late 80s, and my dad's playing with them, that people said, how come you don't get together with the other guys? And Mike said, well, these are the guys. So this is amazing, because the same thing went down, and it's not my pocket, but the same thing was going down with like the Beach Boys when Hal Blaine was playing the studio stuff, and then Brian or Dennis Wilson, whoever the drummer was, it was hard. They couldn't really go out on tour and replicate that sound. That's right. So like that would have been interesting for the perceptive. Records and radio were the that was the medium at the time, and so people would be going to the shows live, expecting to hear that kind of groove, and but yet did it go? Were they still able to tour that record, and nobody really? Oh yeah. Well, Eric was able to play, as good as Joe. Sure. So he was locked into it anyway. If you were savvy, you would have said, Harry's not quite the same. Harry's fills were straight out of, because it was surf stuff. Yeah. Right. And so his stuff wasn't as tight, but there was energy there. Right. And if you listen to, like, I have the recordings of them opening up for Cream at Brandeis University, and they come out, everybody wants to see Cream, and they come out and blow people's minds, and like, who is this group? The album had just been out for maybe a couple months. Wow. And so Harry could really keep the momentum going. He was a good live drummer. I don't fault him for. What are you going to do? You're talking about Mount Rushmore Purdy. It's like he did he did his thing. That's right. And really, my dad said, it was rough for him, because he had people coming up to him and going, "Oh my God, that fill that you did on the beginning! Oh, it's hard. I've never seen nothing like this." And I was like, all this kind of stuff, and I'll stay with you at that thing at the end. Okay, and he had to take that. Wow. And then he, I think my dad remembered him saying, "Alan, you got me lying to my mother." And they were both, Jewish, and so Alan understood that, that's not good. It's like, you're lying to, well, Mom's not going to be happy about that. So that was where they relented, and on the second album, those guys did play. But for, there were some tracks that were, that did have Purdy and Joe brought back in on some tracks that were on the second album. I want to be clear, though. Because I have a really water-damaged copy of one of the albums, and the accompanists are listed. But the first two albums, there were no accompanists listed, or just the first one? They were always listed. I think they were always listed. It was always those. They didn't list Purdy on the first album. No. They would never have listed. Yeah, that was standard for Purdy. He didn't even think twice about not getting credit. He was a fixer. He came in to fix it. That was it. Yeah. And he did. And that Orpheus was one of like 6 sessions he had that day. Yeah, right. I get. And it's all a bunch of white kids. Yeah. He doesn't even remember. And you go, well, that was the Animals that you play, and that was this, and I don't know. Right. So to him, it was just, it was whatever. And he just,
he was just so lovable and so charming, and had such amazing energy and everything. Everybody you just immediately loved Purdy as soon as you met him. And so that was that began the process. When my dad played with those guys and knocked out those songs that fast, he was like, this is who I want to be playing with. Like the seeds of discontent had been sown. And so it was like, okay, well, let's go tour this, and we'll do this, and it sounds good, and we're moving, we're moving along live, and
I mean, you're opening for Cream, and
he was okay with it, but it was like he's getting better and progressing and all of that kind of stuff. And Harry, in particular, is not. Harry wants to be famous. His idol is Mickey Dolenz. That's he wants to be.
Right.
He wants to be on a TV show, and so there's where that kind of process happened. And so when those guys kind of, it was hard to take for them, and I don't think they ever really came to terms with the fact that Orpheus was like Steely Dan. It was like, or the Beach Boys, where it's like, that's Brian, or that's Fagan and Becker.
Dude, the first time, the first note, or the first time you hear that, you know exactly who it is. Yeah.
That's right.
Right.
And so you recognize, well, that's the guy.
Right.
He's the leader of the group.
Right.
It's his sound.
Right.
Nobody does anything that doesn't go through him. And he's the one, even if you don't want to play a song for Bruce and you think you're playing it for Alan's still going to go, what do you think, Bruce? That was the thing. Alan considered Bruce to be Orpheus.
Exactly.
So it was hard for them to come to terms with that. And so when it came out later that Purdy had played on those records, that was, they resisted that for a long time and pretended like, I don't know if that's true or not, all that kind of nonsense. Like, you don't think that's you? Get out of here. So, or you don't think that's Purdy? So it was just recent that Joe's daughter found us on Facebook and said, and Joe had passed away in the 70s, passed away pretty young.
Yeah.
And she said, I got a photo, and I think it's your dad. And I said, really? And I said, send it to me. And she sent it to me, and there's the photo of Purdy, Joe, Dad, Jack, Alan on the piano in the recording session. So there's the evidence right there. And there's Purdy just looking amazing with his suit all young and thin and everything. And there's Joe. Oh, my God, it's Joe Mack. And Joe, Joe was most famous for playing bass on Like a Rolling Stone. That's him on Like a Rolling Stone. He's played on tons of stuff. And he has his own cult following who's created like a Facebook page for him.
I mean, honestly, like I mean, in the lexicon of, because obviously he was a double bass player. I mean, he could play everything, and like,
oh yeah,
like I'm thinking like going back to like Milt Hinton and freaking George Duvivier. Like I just never heard that. I mean, I'm not a big early Dylan fan, so I never looked at the back of the album. I want to be clear: who resisted the idea that Purdy actually played on the album?
Well, Harry did, and
wait, hold on. Hold on. But you're why though? Because I thought you said when you started to go on tour, people were like, that was.
No, I mean later. I mean years later.
Then all of a sudden the story changed, right? He wanted to take credit for it. Yeah, it's so bizarre.
Yeah, my dad is sort of quiet. He moved way out to California, so he wasn't part of the scene anymore. He became
And Harry was like, "Yo, that was me, man. That was me."
That's right. Yeah. And so this guy who had been for those years saying, "I was in the group Orpheus and all this stuff," and then it comes out that Bernard Purdy was the drummer in the Orpheus. Look, the biggest album that everybody knew kept on the time wasn't Harry. So that was. That was cataclysmic for him. Instead of just sort of coming out and saying it was a studio musician early on, he kind of lived with that lie for a long time.
Right. I don't know how that's interesting.
Right. Yeah. So that it all sort of comes out, and my dad didn't even think about the fact, well, yeah, Purdy. And then Purdy's still playing with my dad during that period, late 80s, the band sort of reforms and goes and plays the Boston Music Awards. So now they're right in Harry's neck of the woods, where Harry's, people are all there. And why isn't Harry playing with them? And it's like, well, because Harry wasn't on the records, that kind of thing.
Yeah, he didn't. It would have been it's a wild and very common. That was so common. I mean, I also want to ask you this. I'll send you, because I did a really, you're going to love this interview that I did with Purdy like 10, 15 years ago. And he talked about, and again, we're talking about a sweet, lovable teddy bear of the shaman drummer.
Right.
He told me at the end of the interview, and he was declarative about doing fixes on like 20 Beatles songs.
Right.
Okay, now every person in the world, now, I mean, obviously the Beatles, people getting, but you're telling me this story about Harry, everybody gets their panties in a bunch, because it's like...
Oh, he's had death threats from it.
But I mean, literally, I'm talking about like people that I am close to, like Jim Keltner, who are like, oh, I don't know why Purdy would say that. I'm like, wait, what? I'm like, and again, and Keltner's really close with Ringo, and is close with Harrison. But it's like, is that true? Did he do that shit?
What is definitively true and provable is that once the Beatles became famous, Brian owned the Decca masters.
Right.
Decca turned them down. Those recordings were financed by Brian Epstein, so he owned those. So he then said, "Well, I got all these great songs that let's release them." And it was even determined then that Pete's best drumming, that was previous to Ringo joining the Decca stuff, was not good. And so let's dress it up and make it. And of course, the New York Capitals heard it and said, we need to punch these up. And so they brought in Cornell Dupree and Purdy, and both went on to be in Aretha Franklin's band,
of course,
and King Curtis. And so they brought them in and did little overlays on them. And Purdy said that was standard procedure. If something was already recorded, and even if the drums were already on another track, they figured out a way to kind of mute it and replace those tracks, and I would come in over that to fix certain sections, or to play the whole thing over and sound just like the guy, but not lagging.
So this is really important. We're talking about pre-Ringo original master stuff. That is provable.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So there's where everybody who's a rabid Beatles expert thinks they know everything. And I know where they were every day. All that kind of stuff. They all acknowledge that. And
okay, well that makes me feel a little bit better. I mean, as far as the other stuff, I'm not even I just remember Purdy going off on, and when I put that up online, I put that.
Well, then Purdy then says, then Purdy follows it up and says, yeah, but that's not all I did.
Oh, boy.
Now, for him to say this is so, for him to, if he had just invented this in the 80s, that would be one thing.
Right.
Or in the 90s. But up to 1970, and Orpheus is recording at A&R Studios. Paul McCartney is across the hallway recording Ram. And this is Orpheus recording their fourth and final album. It's on Bell Records.
Yeah.
And they brought in Purdy, right? Because my dad had fired two members of the group, or he'd fired the group and said, I'm going to play with these guys now. So they bring in Purdy, and Purdy's playing with Dad's new bassist, Howie Hirsch. Howie Hirsch went on to produce Paula Abdul and, tons of hip-hop records, Poison by Belle Biv DeVoe and all this. He was a 19-year-old genius. And and the first time he had heard Orpheus, he was at Amherst. He was in college. And he said, I was standing there. Orpheus had come on, and I sort of knew of Orpheus. And all of a sudden, I'm just hearing your father playing guitar, and it sounds like a keyboard, like a piano. I was like, well, how is he playing all of those notes? Oh my God. And they're blown away. He says, I was totally blown away. Somebody sends us a bunch of photos from Amherst of Orpheus playing live, and there's Howie. It's this guy with this, perm and these little glasses, and he's standing there on the side, and you could see him exactly the way he had described it for years. His face, like, oh my God, looking right at Dad. So he brings this young, amazing virtuoso down who could play everything, and he brings him down to play bass, and he introduces him to Purdy, and Purdy, all right, kid, I'm going to be playing with you. All right, let's go. Starts playing, and Purdy goes, oh my God, who is this kid? And everybody, and he's just locked into Purdy. And Purdy plays a triplet at the end of a song, just out of nowhere, and Howie plays it with him. Like, anticipates it and plays it.
This is what it's about, man. This is what it's about.
Right.
Yeah.
And so they end this track. I have this demo of the track, and Purdy stands up and goes, how'd you know I was going to do a triplet? And he goes, I don't know. I just kind of felt it. And so Phil Ramone, who was overseeing the session, and Fred Weinberg, the engineer, come running in. And go, man, that was amazing. How'd you know he's going to do a triplet? Wow, they were all. And so Phil says, you know who this is, right? And he goes, yeah, what, who? And he goes, this is Bernard Purdy. He goes, he played on Beatles records. Yeah, that's him on, he starts listing the tracks. Now, these aren't the Decca tracks.
So whoa, dude. We're talking, this is mind-blowing.
Right. So Phil Ramone in 1970 already knew that. And there was already and there was even an interview, I think in 67, where Purdy had mentioned it. So all of this stuff has since come out. Why would this guy be making this up? It's early on. Why would he be making it up? And specifically saying 21 songs.
21 songs. No, I want to be clear though. Is that like was that like some sort of like print article that's like you got to go to the library and get it from 67 where he first talked about it? Or
yeah, there's a whole YouTube documentary where a guy details what the hell is Purdy talking about, and he goes in there and they talk about that one article where Purdy mentioned just in passing.
Yeah, so I mean this is not late 80s Purdy like revisionist history shit. And why would he lie about it anyway, dude?
That's right. And that's him talking about it while he was still an active session musician. So this was it. So, look.
And it would make sense because, I mean, the feel on that, I don't know, man. All I'm saying is, and you're telling me that, so how did
I'm saying I don't know the songs, and neither really does Purdy, because Purdy wasn't paying attention, and to him it's another white group thing.
Right, he's like it's just a skiffle group from Britain, but it's
right.
like
and also there's another thing is Purdy would name the tracks that he worked on, and then other guys would get pissed and say, Purdy, I'm on that track, and Purdy would go, that's fine, but I also played on it too, because they would bring in multiple drummers, especially with Steely Dan. So
don't even get me started, dude. I mean,
like he told me a story about Jim Keltner calls him and is pissed and starts raving at him, and Purdy goes, hello,
yeah, right, how you doing?
Calming down, and he says, I drummed on that track, and you said in this interview that you did it too. And he said, I did do it too, but yours is the one that they used.
Exactly.
So in those kinds of situations, like those Decca recordings, most of those, if you want to hear the Purdy version of it, you have to go back to those Capitol 45s. When they were reissued later, they went right back to Pete's stuff. So
wow.
The same thing happens with all of that. There's a if you go into the world of studio musicians who were working at the time, Purdy's claim, they won't come out and say it because they don't want to get death threats too, but Purdy's claim is not outrageous. It's not. They said, look, these guys who think that they know what was happening in these sessions have no idea. They think they know what was going on, and they don't know. They don't know. They think that, oh, well, especially with the Beatles, we know what they were doing every day, and we know what Ringo sounds like, and none of that sounds like there's any overdubs. And how could they have possibly done it? It's logistically impossible. All that kind of stuff. But you just don't know, because so much stuff, like the Hang On Sloopy story came out recently. And so for all that time, that McCoy's drummer thought it was him, or, whatever.
Right. No, I mean, I mean, Keltner told me that him and Rick Marotta love each other, but he went up to him and that's the thing, like, when the Steely Dan would do like Royal Scam, they'd list all the drummers who potentially played on the album, but did not necessarily who played on that specific track. You'd have Gadd, Marotta, Jim Gordon, but you never knew who played on the Fuzz or Green Earrings. You didn't know that shit.
Yeah, and especially in the '60s, there was nothing documented. The guys would come in at night and play, and then be gone, and no one. And then they come in the next day, and the drummer would go, "Hey, I sound pretty good on this." But
it's also fair to say, it's fair to say, because, like you said, the McCoy's drummer just found out after that thing's been out for 70 years, or
and refuted it. No, that's not true.
Right, and then all of a sudden, I mean, I can't, but I
played on it.
I mean, just to put a cap on this, it's like,
right.
McCartney or these guys claim ignorance to the whole thing. They deny it. What do they say?
Well, Purdy went on to play on the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band Bee Gees thing with George Martin and the Jeff Beck group. That was the Jeff Beck group.
Jesus.
And Peter Frampton. And when I was running Purdy's social media, I reached out to Peter Frampton, and I said, Purdy, you got to build up your account. I'm connecting you with everybody. I'm going to start sending you messages, and I'll tell people what I'm saying. I'll tell you what I'm saying, but I'm going to start sending okay, you do whatever you want, John. And so I was doing, I got him hooked up with Bootsy Collins, who got him his new management, and so he's finally now getting paid, because people would just invite him to stuff, and then he'd play on it, and then leave, and then never get paid.
Jesus.
So that stuff was happening, and he needed to get his management secured, and I was getting him gigs with Wolfpack and all these guys who loved him, and we're all Steely Dan.
Obsessive, yeah, I totally.
They just love it, so they were like, oh my God, can you get Bernard Purdy to play with us? And I was like, yeah. So Peter Frampton, even when they were doing that there's George Martin. So George Martin's working with Purdy on that, and everybody. And then, Purdy also auditioned for the Plastic Ono Band, and he didn't. The story of that was sort of interesting. They were bringing in everybody, and Purdy was the hottest one in New York. If you got Purdy, that was It
was hard because he had like 8 gigs a day.
That's right. So he came in, and even when he did the 2 tracks with James Brown, he did the New York version of "It's a Man's World" and "I Feel Good." They did 2 versions of those, ones down in Augusta and then ones in New York. Wow. Even when he did that in '65, 4, whatever that was, James Brown was like, so you're the hot shit, Even then, everybody knew who he was, even early on. Remember, when he came to New York, he came to New York with no money and talked his way into a session, and it was Doris Troy's "Just One Look."
He told me that. He told me that. Yeah.
Right out the bat, he's in the top 10, and everybody's like, this guy is unbelievable. So with Purdy.
Frampton. I mean, Frampton might have validated. I was just asking about.
Well, everybody knew that. Everybody knew
the Decca story.
Right. Everybody knew that the Purdy played on Beatles tracks. Everybody knew it then. Jeff Beck knew it. Everybody knew it in the 70s. Everybody knew it in the 60s. Phil Ramone knew it.
Yep.
And Phil Ramone, after he's talking about Purdy playing on Beatles tracks, is walking across the hallway to go back into the sessions for Ram with Paul McCartney. And Paul McCartney knew who Orpheus was, because his kid, he would talk to my dad, and his kid. I think Mary had just been born, and he had this Linda had her daughter, and they were playmates with my dad, with my older brother Oliver, my dad's son. So they were running around A&R Studios hallway playing and all that kind of stuff. And so it was all, everybody knew who it was, and Paul knew Can't Find the Time, and he knew that this group was recording. And then, by the way, upstairs is a new cat named Elton John, who's recording his first,
Wow.
the first big live album that he did. That was all recorded live at A&R. So all of this stuff is happening, and you know, Purdy hears Howie and says to him, "Listen, I can put you to work. Come down here, and I'll get you 10 sessions a day. I'll get you into the union. I'll tell you, I'll get you the, transportation, the whole thing." Purdy knew exactly what to do with Howie. And Howie goes, "Well, I'll have to think about it." And then goes into hibernation, gets a girlfriend and doesn't do anything for 5 years until a bunch of other guys come and find him. And then he joins them, and it becomes the American Standard Band, and they quickly get picked up, and then they're Joe Cocker's backup group.
Wow.
So Howie sort of looks at that fourth album as this missed opportunity where he could have been playing music that whole time and becoming a studio musician with Purdy, and this whole world that he just got a little bit of taste of.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
It worked. JM, we got to do set 2 tomorrow or whatever. But I my final question in set 1 for you is. The definitive Purdy for me is his work on the first Gil Scott-Heron album, which is just unreal, man. I mean, that's when the Purdy that I love,
right?
It just comes right through on those.
Yep.
It's so ridiculous, but I remember when I interviewed Brian Jackson, Gil's partner, and he talked about a lot of the elders were always like, "You got to get your publishing, man. You got to get your publishing." And I just wanted to talk because your dad is obviously kind of an iconic, unsung master musician in the lexicon of Western music. And I have to believe, I already kind of know the answer, but within his contracts early on, he was always seeing royalties for his. He made sure that he got his publishing.
Well, the way it worked is he signed with Lorber, and it was for the time it wasn't bad. It was 50% split with the publishing.
That's not bad, actually.
And 100% of his BMI. The problem is that Lorber didn't honor any of those contracts.
What?
So he never got his 50% of the publishing. And he never got his BMI royalties because Lorber said, "I got the perfect manager for you." Instead of Dad, as I mentioned before, signing with Ray Perrette, he signed with one of Lorber's guys. I think it was Abramson. And that guy took all of the my dad didn't even know he was supposed to get airplay royalties. So that guy was taking all of the money from the BMI royalties. The BMI royalties are going right to him. He had power of attorney. So they were going right to him through that whole period of when all of Can't Find the Time's playing all over the place.
Dude, this is breaking my heart, though.
Yeah, well, so I mean that was typical. So money was coming in from the live shows, and maybe a little bit of a kind of a stipend from Lorber. And it wasn't until my dad. So part of the reason why Orpheus, the fourth Orpheus album, my dad wrote songs on all of those records.
Right.
But by the fourth Orpheus album, he was like, "I'm not giving this sucker another song." So that's why the guy who had written that my dad had discovered in Congress Alley, Stephen Martin, he had brought him in, and Stephen Martin had wrote a couple songs or 3 songs on the first album, Congress Alley, Music Machine, and Doorknob Song. Those are all great songs. My dad's arrangements of Stephen Martin songs, and he at that point he had the rest of the guys had left the group. There was there was a just sort of briefly there was a situation. The reason that the group changed for the fourth album and had a different lineup was Jack was really a guy that my dad had been with from the beginning, and it was really when my dad would be writing songs, he would be writing songs with Jack in mind. What's Jack going to sing on this? Jack's vocal part should be here. And the songs that Jack sang, he wasn't a songwriter, but the ones that he did sing lead on were ones that my dad gave him, like I'll Fly and Music Machine. Those were ones that my dad said, okay, here's how to sing it. I want you to sing this part. And it was because their voices blend so well, and he could hit those higher notes. And so that was really the guy he was focused on. He also liked, as far as writing, he also liked collaborating with Eric. Eric wasn't a songwriter and said many times he didn't enjoy it, but would throw a line or two to Dad. And so that group was going well, but what was happening was Jack was, an alcoholic. And both my dad and Eric, the bass player, had kids and wives, and were living, and were not the party thing. And so I think Harry knew that my dad was not happy with him musically. And so what he did was kind of he hung out with Jack, and he kind of enabled Jack to the point where Jack began to not fall apart. He couldn't party, like anybody else could, because he's an alcoholic. So he began to show up to shows drunk, and I think because Harry thought, I better align myself with Jack, otherwise I'm going to get kicked out of here. That started to divide the group. That's really why that group came apart.
Yeah.
They had their own sort of story to it, and my dad never really cared to kind of correct it, because it was like, who cares? It's like, who
yeah, it's like, dude, the truth is the truth,
That's right. Yeah. So what was happening was, by the third album, my dad was already starting to play with another group of guys, which became the fourth album guys. And he, so he had two kind of groups going at the same time. That group that kind of became the fourth Orpheus album lineup was called 2 Foot Lamb Door. And that was sort of his side group that he was playing with. And he was doing sort of stuff that he'd moved out of Worcester.
It was Steve Martin, Elliot Sherman, Hirsch.
That's right.
Yeah.
And Howie Hirsch and then drummers that went on to work with Clean Living, which was another group out of Massachusetts that came out of kind of the ashes of Orpheus.
What was the name of that drummer?
Billy.
It's all right. It wasn't Purdy except on the album.
Yeah. So he was a great drummer. He came to our shows. I just forgot his name. I know his name, but he was he's a great drummer, and they were working with him, but they knew that when they were going to go into the session, we're going to go and work with Purdy again.
Right.
So this was just sort of to fulfill the gigs that they had. They had arranged with the previous group. They went around as Orpheus, doing those shows, and it was funny. Like they would go do Orpheus gigs and not do Can't Find the Time and piss everybody off.
I love it,
because my dad was just kind of moving on to a whole different kind of sound, and it was sort of sad that he watched. Like, when Paul McCartney, when Orpheus breaks up, it's like Paul goes into a depression and moves up to Scotland and, starts drinking. It's like that's the same kind of thing. And I think Dad talked to him about that. That was the same kind of thing with Orpheus. It was sad that his partnership with Jack had fallen apart. And so, when Jack was showing up to gigs drunk and sort of talking late and all this stuff and talking in between songs, they'd have to kill his mic and all this kind of stuff. And then, so my dad went to Alan and he said, listen, I'm having problems with Jack. I'm to fire him. And Alan goes, it's your group, do what you want. And so when he did when they did a show and it was the same thing, and he said, listen, Jack, if you do this again, you're out of the group. And it happened again. He said, listen, we can't do this. You're out of the group. Well, you can't do that. And that's where this kind of concept of my dad didn't do what really Fagan and Becker did, which was establish that I'm the leader of the group. It's, the definitive. He kind of let it kind of just flow on
No,
its own.
I that's so Jerry Garcia too.
Right, exactly. So you just got a guy who goes, I don't want a confrontation, that kind of stuff.
Right.
And so consequently, then you got these guys who all think that they're equal members of the group.
Right.
And still, still to this day, that's we were all equal members and contributing, and no, you weren't. So
it's really important to get this. But do you want to do set 2 tomorrow?
Sure.
All right, we'll do it same time.
All right.
I want to be clear though. I want to be clear.
Yeah.
Your dad never saw the money that he deserved.
He never saw the money he deserved. However, 56 years, you can terminate your copyrights. So we terminated our copyrights, and he's now in control. The trust is now in control of all of his songs, and we sued Lorber for unpaid royalties and settled out of court. All of that was settled.
Wow.
Lorber now doesn't control, the name Orpheus. He doesn't. All of this stuff. He really messed up because I came into the scene, and my dad, who just kind of went on with his life and whatever. I came in and went, no, we're fixing all of this. And right before he died, we got it all fixed. And just after, it sort of fixed after. So we now have control of all of his songs. Which is the most important. And we've got 100 unreleased recordings dating back to 1965, multiple demos of Can't Find the Time, all the stuff that you would ever want to hear. And you
got all the publishing on that.
And we've got all of that stuff. So all that stuff's going to come out. And really, what's great is all of the music that Lorber had available on streaming platforms was really terrible. It was mastered back in 1992. I was never happy with it. The mixes were terrible. Plus, he started to mess with it with Audacity later and add echo effects and all that kind of stuff. So all of that stuff is gone, which I'm delighted about, because I want remasters of all 4 Orpheus albums. I want it back to the way my dad intended it to be, including where they were speeding up tracks and all that kind of stuff. It should be exactly the way it was, and the mixes should match the albums. And we're going to find the alternate takes of Purdy playing on certain tracks, which are going to be outstanding. So everything is back to where it should be. It's all come full circle, and finally,
your dad is somewhere upstairs, just smiling and still picking away and saying, "All right,
that's it.
Go for it." Yeah, that's it.
And right before he died, the greatest thing ever happened was I convinced Peter Farrelly from the Farrelly Brothers to put Can't Find the Time in a movie that called the Greatest Beer Run Ever, and called him the day that if I had called him 1 hour later, he wouldn't have been able to do it. He was literally in post-production. He said, I'm going to put the song in. He put the song in. The movie came out. It was released in theaters and on Apple TV. I went up to visit Dad, put it on the TV. He wasn't doing well. The song comes on. He sings along with the song. The next morning, dead. So that was it. The last thing he got was the greatest gift ever. And when I called Peter Farrelly and I said, "Hey man, I just played the song and Dad just passed away the next day," but he heard it.
He heard it.
He started, he got emotional, started crying. He said, "I'm going to put an Orpheus song in every fucking movie."
JM, man, this was really a great hang. We'll do it again tomorrow.
Cool.
All right, man.
All right. Talk to you later.
Be cool.
It.
Peace.
Bye-bye.
Aside from Bananas Kid, did you know, the Grateful Dead? Did you know, Justin Kreutzmann at all? Did you run into any of the kids from other bands?
I didn't go to school with them. I knew of them. Most of them that were out in West Marin were the Youngbloods.
Steve Swallow was out there. All the Poets were out there too.
Right. Yeah.
Did you know Robert Creeley, or did your dad know those cats?
I don't know if he did or not. I think he, mostly from mid 70s through the 80s is when we were out in Hoyt Rays, and he was mostly connected with people that were coming to the church.
Huh.
So there was, Jerry Corbett. There was Marcus Uslewski, who Marcus Uslewski started off as a rockabilly guy, which he had a different name then, and then he got into painting. Those were his linear paintings that were all over the place in the 80s.
Wow.
Sort of landscaping, line design. He then went on to become Rusty Evans, and he might have been Rusty Evans, I think, when he was doing rockabilly. Then he got into folk. Then he sort of has this amazing story, and he got into folk, and then he got into gospel, and then became a Johnny Cash imitator. Went on stage sounding like Johnny Cash, looking like Johnny Cash, and his son Danny Uslewski started a band out there called Chrome Johnson, which was pretty big in that area, sort of like Radio Musique and all of the groups that are out there sort of now.
Sure.
That are all the kids out there. And so he was playing with Danny and doing going on tour around the world doing Johnny Cash. But if you go back to his early stuff, especially he did some early psychedelic records that were pretty good. And then when he got into gospel, my dad produced an album that he did with called Pilgrim's Son with Folkways, and
wow.
did a couple of other projects with him. And they were, close until Marcus died, and I think around the 2010, something around there. But there's always music going on. There's always these guys coming in and out, and forming groups out there, and then coming to my dad to get advice, and then they would, well, let's go up to to the studio, and the Youngbloods had studios out there. I know Banana had a studio set up in his house, and
they made some because the Youngbloods were so successful. They had Raccoon Records, and they made so many cool records at that space with Steve Swallow, Joe Bauer. I have those.
Yep.
It's like I'm figuring like your dad. What was it? Was it a non-denominational church, or what? I mean, what was the?
Yeah, it was just an independent Protestant church. We were just, he had, I think what had happened to him in the music business was so, was just so like such a bummer.
Yeah.
That he came out to California. He was working at a gas station. He had no money because he wasn't making any money. He had, didn't make it, any money off royalties or any of that kind of stuff. Lorber was desperately looking for him. He had fulfilled his 4-album contract with Lorber, but Lorber wanted to keep Orpheus going. And
you're telling me Lorber couldn't find your dad?
Yeah, well, when he disappeared, nobody really knew where he was.
I'm sorry. Like you're saying, he just took off for Point Reyes and just dropped it, and nobody heard from him.
That's it. When the
Wow.
whole reason that the 4th Orpheus album didn't have, I think I mentioned this before, but it didn't have most of his songs on there because at that point he went, well, I'm not getting any money, so why do I want to give Lorber any more of my songs?
Right.
So that 4th album is mostly his arrangements of Stephen Martin songs. Stephen Martin wrote Congress Alley and
the Worcester Cat that he discovered.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that was, he was a poet and a songwriter, in the Worcester area, and just playing sort of open mics and that kind of stuff. And then people said, and my dad had known him previously, knew of him. And then they said, he's writing songs. And so that was it. And so my dad said, well, let me hear these songs. And then worked up the arrangements for them, I think in one day, played them over the phone to Lorber, and Lorber said, you're a genius. Bring them down. Like now we've got a full album. So most of those songs off the first album were my dad's, and then he took 3 from Martin, and then did his arrangements of them. And so, that group 2 Foot Lamb Door, which was sort of a side project of Dad's while he was playing with Orpheus in '69.
Wow.
that became Orpheus. That group just morphed into Orpheus, when all the shit went down with the original group or with those two members. So he, Stephen Martin had come out to San Francisco, and a lot of people were coming out to California. Harry Sandler from Orpheus, the drummer,
Sure.
who was the live drummer, he had come out to L.A. and was managing people. So there's people coming out to California, and they were coming out to California, and they would all come and visit Dad. And there's always this sort of subtle thing is, do you want to get this group back together? Because there was shows that there was demand for them, especially on the East Coast.
Really?
And there were people within the industry who would, when you would say Orpheus, they would get really excited. And one of them was Brian Interland, who managed the surf ballrooms venues on the East Coast, and then later went on to work for Capitol Records. And Interland was the one who, I think it was after the third Orpheus album on MGM, Mike Curb had taken over MGM Records, right, and wanted to, clean out all of the stuff that wasn't making any money. And the Boston Sound stuff, for the most part, with the exception of Orpheus, was not making any money. The Skunk Baxter,
the spinach,
Ultimate Spinach, but that stuff, it wasn't selling enough to.
No, I mean, in its time, it was awesome, but then it just didn't.
Right.
Yeah.
But it wasn't connecting to anybody, and it wasn't radio friendly. And Orpheus was always radio friendly. So, the thing that Mike Curb did was, he had taken over. He was like the youngest executive at the time to take over a record label, and they had just got rid of Nazir and all of Lorber's buddies, who were the original, executive staff at MGM, and a lot of those guys were indicted later for fraud. They were taking Orpheus records and tons of MGM records, all the stuff that was on the Animals were still on that label, and Hank Williams Jr., and there was a bunch of, they had a bunch of big names on that label, Connie Francis, and he was buying back the unsold records and then selling them again and pocketing the money.
Yeah.
So it was all over Billboard at the time. The president of Billboard gets indicted, and so they got rid of this guy. They brought in new blood and brought in Mike Curb. And Mike Curb was a pretty conservative guy. He was friends with Nixon, and in an attempt to curry favor to become a lieutenant governor of California, he made he rebranded the decision he was going to make anyway, and say, I'm getting rid of all these groups on MGM Records because they're glorifying drugs. This was during Nixon's first war on drugs campaign. And he did this as a big publicity stunt, and everybody saw through it. I talked to Clive Davis, who said nobody believed that, because part of it was they still had the Animals. They still had Eric Burden on the contract, and Eric Burden said, "I use drugs. Release me from my contract." And it's like, no, we're not going to do it. So part of the groups they got rid of was most of Lorber's stuff, and he came out and we had thought originally that that they got rid of Orpheus, and they got rid of Orpheus because of a lyric in the beginning of I've Never Seen Love Like This, the second single of the first album, where Dad sings, "Baby, remember when we turned on to a rainy day." And so they thought that was the reason that they used. And I think officially, internally, they sort of made it known that they could release Orpheus on it. But what I found out later, because I talked to Mike Curb too, what I found out later was Mike Curb loved Orpheus and didn't want to get rid of Orpheus. He wanted to get rid of the contract that he had with Lorber for all the other groups, for all these development things where they're paying for all this stuff. And Lorber would pay to have these things recorded, but he had a distribution deal with them. And they wanted to end that, but they wanted their fourth and final album. They already assigned a catalog number for it, and he wanted it. But he had said something in an interview that pissed off Lorber, which he said, Boston sound, Schmalston sound. And that pissed off Lorber, and Lorber said, no, I'm taking all the, and he even sent messages to Lorber saying, where's my fourth Orpheus album? I want the fourth Orpheus album. And Lorber said, no, piss off, and I'm taking everything to Bell. And so he took everything to Bell Records, and Bell Records at the time was, that a label that if you already had like a distribution deal, you already had artists signed to you, you could go to Bell and,
sure.
and distribute them. So the fourth album on Bell got despite the fact that it was, Phil Ramone called it, who was in on those sessions, called it an occult classic. Because if you listen to the lyrics on the fourth album, my dad is taking the side of God, and Martin is taking the side of Satan. And the lyrics on all of those songs, Monkey Demon, Big Green Pearl, even the big single-sounding song on that, are all biblical. Everything in that thing is all biblical Book of Revelation stuff,
wow.
talking about fallen angels and demons. And I mean, that album is so wild that it didn't connect with any real previous kind of Orpheus fan. It went right over their heads. And they also didn't like the fact that my dad liked the way Steve Martin sang. And Lorber said, why are you having this guy sing the songs? And he said, I like the sound of his voice. It was kind of Mark Bolan sounding. And he said, you should be singing these songs, Bruce. And he said, no, I'll have him sing it. And so a lot of the songs on them are Steve singing. And that was, that pissed off the label, and it pissed off Lorber and all these kind of stuff. But my dad had the power at that point to kind of do what he wanted, and he also didn't care because this was it. I'm finishing the record. In fact, that record was going to be heavily orchestrated like the first album. And when my dad came in and heard all of this Lorber, schmaltzy orchestration on
schlock,
that, sounded very
schlock, man.
Right, sounded like a TV commercial.
Jesus shit. Christ!
Right, he said, "No, none of that. No, I want take that all off." And typically, a producer would have said, "Screw yourself. Right. This is my." But he did, and so he took it all off, and you only hear little elements of it in Monkey Demon. Big Green Pearl has got the orchestration, the typical Lorber orchestration, but that was it. And to Lorber's credit, he did. He listened to my dad, and he did what my dad wanted. And my dad didn't have a problem with the first album, with the orchestration of the first album. He liked it. There was a couple little things where Lorber.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was different. It was the first album. It was different.
Right. And I think he wanted that sound. He wanted his music to be big, and
yeah, he was in a different headspace by the fourth album,
Right. His fourth album was the reviews of it were people were like, this is very Crosby, Stills and Nash, and somebody said I think it was Rolling Stone. They said they make effective use of quiet. And it is a very quiet record. It's almost like you're in a room with these guys who are playing to you. And, and then you have the bombastic stuff of Purdy on that. Purdy is really, you're really hearing Purdy playing fantastically on all those tracks.
Was it sonically quiet, or were they just using space?
They were it was acoustic guitar. You would have, the difference between the orchestrated version of that, Lorber would have, if you stripped everything off all the Orpheus records, they would all probably sound like that. Huh. Lorber's filling in the spaces. And as he says in this interview, it was Tom Wilson, who I forgot to mention, the producer.
Legend. I sat next to his wife eating sushi one night. It was kind of legendary. Like 10, he had passed on, but she's like, I'm his wife, and I was like, holy
wow.
shit.
Yeah. He was, he's there. There he is with
wow.
With Bob Dylan at the. In the sessions for Like a Rolling Stone, and Joe Mack, who played on the first Orpheus album, is sitting there too. I've got all these photos, and Tom Wilson was the one that that had a radio show called Music Factory, and he interviewed, my dad and Alan just before the first album was released. And Alan says right there, I based all my orchestration on Bruce's guitar. That's where it all came from. I sat down with him. I figured out what the notes were. I figured out what chords he was playing, which were all unusual and stuff he loved. And so he based everything around that. And so that's why when you saw Orpheus live, my dad's playing, with finger picks, and he's playing through a Magnatone solid state 300-watt amp with a tone booster, and he's got a custom pickup setup from EU Wurlitzer, and the thing, he's filling in all of the little spaces, so all of the little lines of the horns and the strings and all that kind of stuff were all stuff he was playing.
Sure.
So everybody was flipping out about that. But anyway, Mike Curb took over, and then dumped those groups, and that was a huge thing. But Mike Curb later said, I didn't want to get rid of Orpheus. I wanted I loved Orpheus. Orpheus was very much with Mike Curb Orchestra and all the stuff he was doing later. It was very much in line with what he was doing. So
let me ask you a question. I mean, the bottom jam, there seems to just, this is a sort of an age-old tale of the music racket combined with your dad, who was obviously, very much connected to the astral plane, and, he did it, he lived life like in a righteous kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
At this point now, what is your goal with, they clearly had a massive, I don't want to say cult following, but they and I just wonder what your intentions are for continuing this legacy. I mean, what is, are you at peace with the legacy?
Oh yeah, and I'm much more. I've collected every single thing, and I've talked. And while I've been here in LA,
right,
I've been able to talk to people. I've been able to talk to Chevy Chase about when he went on tour posing as Orpheus, and which was a big scam with Ron Sunshine, the booking agent from Premier Talent.
Man,
and Ron was doing that. Premier Talent was doing that on the East Coast and West Coast and the South. So they had Orpheus, and I found all of the stuff. I said, Orpheus at the the whatever place in Pasadena, and I, that's like 1969, and it says playing their hit, Can't Find the Time. And my dad had first heard about that. At the time, somebody came from the West Coast, and they said, hey man, I saw Orpheus was being promoted at a venue in some hippie rag in San Francisco. I don't know if it was a Fillmore or whatever. And he went, what? And so they called and, called the place and said, is Orpheus playing there tonight? And they said, yeah. And is that the Orpheus place? Can't Find Time? Yeah, that's them. You freaking assholes. So that stuff was happening all the time. And then we found out later, Chevy Chase did an interview when he came out with one of his movies in the 80s, and he said, I love Boston. I lived here for a while, and I was in a bad group, and we went on tour posing as Orpheus, and we all dressed alike, and we did a couple shows in the South, and people were yelling at us, you're not Orpheus. And he said, I'm not playing the keyboards, yelling back, yes,
you're not Orpheus.
Right.
Yeah, this music sucks, dude.
Yeah. So we found out later that he was part of one of Lorber's groups called Chameleon Church, which was kind of an Orpheus sound-alike group. It was Ted Myers from The Lost.
Wow.
And then Kenny Sharon and then Chevy Chase and another guy, and Lorber put them all together, and it didn't go anywhere. I don't even think they released a record. They may have released a single, or maybe a record came out at some point, but it never went anywhere. And that was '68. And they've, people have since rediscovered it, and it's sort of interesting that Chevy Chase is on it, playing drums or piano. And it's probably Purdy. So,
wow.
So he went on tour and he talked about it. And so then I saw him at the premiere for Hot Tub Time Machine. And so I came up to him and I said, hey, my dad's in, Orpheus. Remember Orpheus? And he goes, yeah. yeah, I can't find time. And he goes, I said, was that true? You went on tour posing as Orpheus? He said, yes. And I said, who was behind that? Was it Lorber or in the booking agent? And he said, yes, both. So they both knew about it. And so the booking agent came to one of them and said, can you learn these songs? And they said, yeah. And I said, great, we're going to send you down to Kentucky to do a couple shows in the South and Florida or whatever. And don't worry, Orpheus knows about it, and we're splitting it 50-50 with him.
Oh, my gosh.
So it was all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, so we've since become connected with Chevy and have become friends, and he's came up and did some session work at Skywalker Ranch and plays piano on some stuff that we're going to be doing.
Wait, hold on. Wait a minute. Can you talk about your dad's relationship with George Lucas?
Yeah, so George Lucas is a fan of Orpheus. So in Modesto, in Modesto, it's so weird. Modesto and Bakersfield.
Right.
Can't Find the Time, Brown Arms in Houston, I've Never Seen Love Like This, Leslie's World, all charted and stayed on the local radio stations there for like 10 weeks. So the whole reason Orpheus didn't become bigger was partly because, and my dad's explained it multiple times, was MGM wasn't paying the record pressing plants. So their first gigs that they had were in Detroit with MC5 and a couple of those.
Sure,
and they went out there.
Wow.
And they went on a radio station. And
hold on, I want to go back for a second.
Yeah.
MC5 was a West Coast band?
No, they went to Detroit.
No, I know, but I mean, they went to Detroit to record, you said.
No, they went after they recorded the first shows they did. I'm sorry, the first shows they did were in Detroit. So they flew them out to Detroit.
Got it.
To start their tour right at like in January. The album was released in January of '68, and they flew them out. And then I think that the furthest they ever went was Detroit, and then they sort of made their way back. And so they went to Detroit, and they played at a couple places there, and they went on a radio station, and the radio station guy said, look, I'll have you on, I'll interview you, but I don't normally interview people who don't have records in the stores. And Dad goes, what are you talking about? And he goes, yeah, your records aren't in the stores. They're not. Oh. And so that's when he called back and found out that, yes, sporadically in certain areas are getting the records. Not every place got the records at the same time. And not every radio station got them at the same time. So everywhere it was, Philly and South Carolina,
sure,
and all these kind of in Texas and all these kind of places, it would all be charting, but all months apart from each other. So that messed up Billboard's.
No, but it was just so it was so beautiful time because it just the bottom line didn't matter really. It was really about meeting a certain bar musically, and if that was the case, you got radio play regionally.
Yeah. I mean, that was it. But it was like, well, why did Can't Find the Time only get to 80? And that was on its second release after MGM.
You know why? Because there were 300 separate record labels, and I mean, you're talking. I mean, I remember interviewing Brian Jackson, Gil Scott-Heron's writing partner, and when The Bottle came out. They were on Strata East. They had no ability to. They were selling records out of boxes in their kitchen. But I mean, They were just so like. I mean, I hate that the in '79 or '80, Joe Sample said that the top 6 companies bought out 300 record labels, and it got real consolidated. And then all of a sudden, it became like an assembly line. Whereas before, stuff was just spread all over the place because. I don't know what else to say. It was just we were not fully interconnected, and the greed factor, it was just more about good music. I mean, people made money.
Yeah, I mean, that was it. We since found out that it was like MGM had put $250,000 into the Boston Sound campaign.
Right.
But these guys were corrupt and siphoning money off.
Well, that was the problem. That was the
right.
So there was a lot of corruption.
Got it, and it charted here in LA. And it charted in Bakersfield and Modesto and a little bit in San Francisco, and then huge in Hawaii. So it didn't, for some reason, if you look at the charts, the radio charts, you'll see that it hit weeks and months apart. So that was because the records weren't being sent out on time, and then they were being flooded into certain areas and then not sent out to other areas. And they found out all of this in '69 and then said, okay, we're going to do it again with the Joyful record. And they released the single Brown Arms and Houston off that with Can't Find the Time again on the flip.
Wow.
So they released the album that was 2 albums before back on it. And then that came out, and then Can't Find the Time goes to 80. And so that was them making a more concerted effort, but that was also right at the tail end, right before My Curb comes in. So that campaign got stifled at the end, and so it was just a big mess. Everybody that heard Orpheus went, "Why isn't this?" You have 2 sort of different types of groups of fans that we find online, broadly, which is. You have the fans that remember Orpheus and they love Can't Find the Time, and that was their prom song. And that's an example of George Lucas. George Lucas grew up in Modesto. Can't Find the Time was on the radio in '68. He was also hearing it at USC, and so he was going back and forth, and he was hearing that song, and it resonated with him.
Wow.
And he liked it. Same with Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris heard of Can't Find the Time and loved Can't Find the Time. And then, there's a big thing in Dad's obit where Chuck Norris talks about him. So all of these people were all listening to it. Dad talked to, of course, Jerry Harrison from the Talking Heads knew Orpheus, and I saw him at an airport. And then I think like a week later, Dad saw David Lynch. And had a conversation with him, and he goes, "Oh, I remember Orpheus." And so it was all this sort of stuff. And then Brian Wilson, we see Brian Wilson at an event, and we go and we go, "Hey, Brian, we're talking about Smile." He had just released the new version of Smile, that he had redone in 2004, I think. And I said, "Yeah, my dad's in a group called Orpheus." He goes, "Orpheus?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, and I said, "You remember that song about it?" And I can't find that. He goes, "Oh yeah, I do. I remember that one. Oh yeah, I love that." B-52s also, they were listening to Orpheus late. They liked Orpheus and Augusta. So all these groups all knew about it. It's all crazy how they knew about it. And the ones that sort of came later looked up at Orpheus and said, "Wow, I really found something unique." The ones that are the contemporaries. We're like, yeah, they were our contemporaries. We remember them, Loving
Sure.
Spoonful.
Yeah, Queskin, those cats, Joan Baez.
Right.
Yeah.
We played with all all of those guys all knew Orpheus, and they all liked Orpheus.
Did your dad, when he was doing the duo stuff, like, was he like contemporaries with Joan Baez, that kind of vibe?
Yeah, and there's a funny story they went to go see Peter, Paul, and Mary. And of course, Mary liked, Mary was a partier, sort of Janis Joplin kind of at the time.
Sure.
And so she liked Dad and said, "Listen, we want to go see this guy. I think that I don't know if he was Zimmerman, but he might have been Dylan. We want to go see this guy Dylan. He's playing over at this place. Do you guys have a car?" And my dad said, "Well, it's my buddy's, parents' car."
Wow.
He had a Valiant. And he said, will you drive them? Peter, Paul, and Mary, want to go to another place and go see this new guy, Bob Dylan. This is 64, 5.
63, 64, yeah.
64, it must have been 64.
Yeah.
And so they said they wanted to go see him. And so they said, and the guy went, "Oh, I got to get my car home. My mom will get mad." So they never did that. But they would see all those people, and they knew all those people, and they were pretty close with Queskin and
Sure.
Maria Moldar,
Jeff Moldauer, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Those guys were right in that area.
That's so. I've interviewed all those cats. Yeah, that is so freaking.
They would, most of these people would. They would play for a little bit, and then they would get a recording contract and go to New York if they were on the East Coast. So they didn't really, if they were really good, they didn't really stay around that long. They would see all that kind of, they would see these people moving on, and so they went, well, that's what we need to be doing.
Right.
And that was, the sort of the impetus to get that going. But yeah, when he came out here, it was just like, oh, well, this is just where everybody ended up. All the people that I was playing with on the East Coast are all out here, and the guys from Earth Opera and
Whoa! You talking about Grisman and those cats?
Yeah.
Yeah, because Peter is dear. Peter and David are both like surrogate uncles to me, man. Like I love those guys so.
Well, Peter came out to Novato.
Oh my God, dude! Those guys, yeah, because Peter was totally rock. Peter was from Massachusetts, so he must have been an Orpheus freak.
That's right. They all came out, and Dad invited him over, and Peter Rowan and Dad wrote a song. Sat down and wrote a song. I sat in the room while they were doing it.
What song was it called?
I gotta look it up.
Please let me know. I gotta hear that immediately.
Yeah, they never recorded it.
No. I gotta get it to dude. That's gonna be so
super fast.
Oh, that's so beautiful, man.
And Dad would write with Jerry Corbett, and he covered one of Jerry Corbett's songs, "Just Like Fire," with Purdy on the drums and Howie and the Orpheus guys. He flew them out, and he did a cover of that, and then he did a cover of "True Love Ways," and then Jesse Colin Young comes over and was listening to it, and he said, "God, I wish I could, just do what you do, where I could just, people aren't like expecting anything from me. I can just do whatever the fuck I want, And I think he felt that pressure to sound a certain way and do a certain thing, whereas Dad could just do whatever the hell he wanted. Nobody knew him. Like it wasn't that many, people just enjoyed whatever type of singing he did or whatever.
Sure. It was just the that is so beautiful, man. I mean, like, would you say that your dad, did he face outside of not being whether he wanted, I feel like part of him as like a sort of an enlightened being, like he was like, I don't want all this money and material stuff. I feel like he looked the other way. If he
never was into that stuff at the time. He didn't want to become famous.
Right. And that's what I'm saying is like outside of that,
he wanted to become a great musician. And so when you meet Purdy and Joe Mack and you come down into New York and you meet all these great guys, and Paul McCartney's across the hallway recording Ram.
Right.
And all this guy, that's his element. Now that's what he wanted to do, and that's all he wanted to do.
Right, he wanted that family vibe. He wanted a good vibe.
That's right. He was just, all that kind of stuff was great. The money he didn't really care about. And when he came, and that really got distilled when he came out to California. He didn't have any money. He's working at a gas station. He meets my mom, and he had previously had a relationship with my brother Oliver. And so he came out, and that kind of didn't work out, and so now he's working. He's into cars, so that's one of the things.
Sure.
So he's doing something he likes, and so gets it and goes to a church meeting, meets my mom, flips, this is it, and so he had found something. If you listen to a lot of the Orpheus songs of Enlightenment, of the second album, and a lot of the fourth album tracks, those are songs that are searching songs, where he knows there's something more,
right?
And there's than this world. He'd already, like, it took the Beatles to become super huge and realize, oh my God, this sucks. This is not what we want.
Right.
And he learned that really early on. And he was the kind of guy, like I said, he just would do a show and then split. And it was like, well, don't you want to hang out with Led Zeppelin? And Cream, they're here. They're, blah, blah, blah. Well,
I freaking love that attitude. It's like you said what you needed to say. You felt good. You made other people feel good. Everybody's cool. Dude, right. Words don't even do justice after that. Who the fuck cares?
That's right. So he comes out one of the right, and his one of the roadies, which was the best Orpheus roadie, was a guy named Burton Swan, and Burton Swan also a very talented musician, a guy that anyone who ever went to an Orpheus show remembers him. He wore a top hat, and he was just hilarious and super, amazing, talented guy. And he had moved out to California first. So he was telling Dad, you gotta come out here, man. It's so much, this is where it is. And he had come to Marin County, and he was studying with Ali Akbar Khan at Khanzab's school. And I think he was playing the sarod, or I can't remember which, or the oud. And so he's learning, and he's telling Dad to come out. And Dad writes a song about this, which we're going to be releasing soon, which is the sort of the link between Dad's Massachusetts and California things, and it's called Constant Comfort. And Dad's singing about, Burton's letter to him. You were waiting, I was coming, and the whole thing. And it's like he's talking about the whole trip in his Vita bus with his girlfriend and his kid, right, driving all the way from Massachusetts in the winter and getting out to Marin and seeing the buds on the trees. Leaving in a blizzard and arriving, with the gorgeous weather.
I'll tell you though, it gets plenty cold out there too, though. It's not the East Coast kind of shit. No, but I think that is so magical that the Cosmos just moved him from that Boston, New England, out to Point Reyes. It's just absolutely perfect.
And the big story that was one of the last posts on Facebook that he did before he passed away was he talked about meeting Khanzab. He come out in the bus. Burton said, hey, you can park here at the school. Just park over here, and there's a hose over here if you need it, that kind of thing. And so he's sitting there, and so the students and the faculty are starting to, who is this guy over here with the bus and all this kind of stuff? And it gets to Ali Akbar Khan, and we'll bring him in for dinner. So they bring my dad in, and they're they're eating and everything and talking, and Dad's wow, this is great. And then somebody hands Dad a guitar, and then Khanzab says, play for us. And Dad said, I've never had stage fright in my life, and I was mortified. I was like, oh my God, I'm playing for the master of all masters. And so he's like going through the Rolodex of songs in his head and trying to figure out what he's going to play. And he goes, The Dream off the first album, which had I don't know if you remember the group Oregon,
Glenn Moore lives about a half hour from me, the bass player.
Okay, so that had
Winter's Light.
The sitar player in that group.
Yeah, Colin Walcott.
So Colin Walcott is all over the first Orpheus album.
Are you kidding me? Are you freaking kidding me?
Yeah, so Blorber had brought this young guy in who could play every instrument. So the sitar, the sarod, the tabla, it's all Colin Walcott on the first Orpheus album. And then also Joe Cuba on the Time.
Is it timbales or conga?
Timbales. Yeah.
No, I don't know. I that is, and you're telling me they knew your dad.
Oh, all these Colin Walcott. Oh yeah, they were all there. Dad was involved with the whole recording of that album. So they all were. But I mean,
Lorber brought in Cuba and Walcott.
Yeah, he brought those guys in.
Dude, that's tasty, man. So I want to be clear. He played a sitar riff on Dream for Ali Akbar Khan.
He plays that. He plays the sarod throughout some of those tracks. But all of the Indian instrumentation on the first Orpheus album is Colin Walcott.
Yeah, Ravi called him my little son or something. It was really beautiful. No, but I mean, when your dad was in front of Ali Akbar Khan, he played The Dream.
So he plays The Dream on the guitar, and that's very perfect for that Indian feel. And
right.
And Khanzab's listening, and then Dad gets done, and there's a sort of pause, and then Khanzab goes, play it again. So Dad goes, okay, and then plays it again. And so at the end of that, Dad's completely overwhelmed. He's just like, oh my God. So he excuses himself from the table, and he goes outside onto the little porch at the school there, and and he's sort of looking up in the sky and just going like, "What is, what's happening?" Wow, that was pretty heavy, and because he felt the whole energy, and behind him is Konsab, and Konsab, puts his arm around him and says, "You can stay here as long as you want." And so Dad was like, "Oh my God!" So that was it. He was like brought right in, and it was like Konsab said, it was like, "I respect you. You wrote that." That was the kind of thing. It was like, that was great.
Wow.
And so cut to Konsab's 80 years old, and they have a big celebration for him at the Marin County Civic Center. And there's, thousands of people there. Everybody's there, and he's sitting in the center of the stage with flowers, and it's all these people paying tribute to him. And my mom, at the time, was working for Senator John Burton. She was his district supervisor. And so she got that, one of those things where it's like, today is Ali Akbar Khan Day, that's announced in the California Senate and all that kind of stuff. And she got that big thing set up with him in a framed thing that's where you read it from him. And so Dad comes out on the stage to present it to him with my mom.
Wow.
And he starts talking. He goes, 20 years ago, and it was way more than 20 years ago, he goes, I came out here, and he explains the whole thing, and I played for you, and it was the most, it was the greatest experience, and I just want to blah, 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 and, and he's has this emotional moment, and Mom then, and he says, so I come bearing gifts, and then Mom reads, the California legislature recognizes today as Ali Akbar Khan Day, and the whole crowd goes, "Whoa!" freaking out. And then Konsab comes up to him and he goes, "I remember you." Wow. Just like on the mic, and everybody's laughing.
Wow.
It's like he listened to the whole thing. He goes, "I remember you now." I was like, "I remember this."
Wow.
So yeah, so that was like a
Whoa,
great
man.
moment for him, where he came out and it was like the whole faculty was like, "Who's this guy in the bus, with the long hair, and he's, taking a shower with the hose or whatever he's doing." And then all of a sudden it's like, "Oh, this is now Konsab's favorite student."
Oh my God,
guy,
dude.
like, right?
Dude, Purdy told me like a couple years ago. I didn't know why, but now I do. I mean, I've been after your dad's spirit. I've been chasing that spirit for a long time.
Yeah.
Yo, JM, listen, can we do another set? I got to hop out of here.
Yeah,
All right.
absolutely.
All right, I'll be in touch.
Okay.
All right, man, be cool.